Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vittorian, and this is the 25th hour, helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle in under an hour. Now, in this week's news for the week of July 11th to 17, 2021, Adams headed to D.C. to meet with Biden to talk gun violence. The Delta variant is spreading like actual wildfires throughout the U.S. Cuomo is being deposed by the New York Attorney General about his sexual assault scandals. Biden decried COVID misinformation on social media, and Senate Democrats have come up with a separate $3.5 trillion human infrastructure proposal if Manchin can support it. Now, onto the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with Blasio. The Delta COVID variant is dominating in the city, comprising 2/3 of new cases. In cases analyzed between June 27th and July 3rd, the Delta variant has popped up in 69% of them, up from 44% the week prior. The 7-day average of cases increased from 133 on June 20th to 438 on July 12th. A Yale University study showed that vaccinations prevented an additional 8,300 deaths and 44,000 hospitalizations in the city in the first half of 2021. The city's Marriage Bureau reopened this week after being shut down for a year and 4 months during the pandemic, with ceremonies set to restart on July 23rd. So go ahead and get hitched.
Yes, wedding bells are ringing. I made a vow that we would get the Marriage Bureau up and running again. We worked with the city clerk's office, and we are bringing back the Marriage Bureau for New York City, opening again as early as Monday. This coming Monday, you and your loved one can book an appointment to get married. And on Friday, the first marriage licenses will be given out.
A week after Comptroller Scott Stringer announced a lawsuit against the mayor for suspending his ability to audit government contracts dealing with buying pandemic supplies, the mayor reinstated Stringer's authority to do so. The Democratic nominee for Comptroller, Councilman Brad Lander, supported Stringer's lawsuit as well. The win may be short-lived as de Blasio overrode a decision by Stringer to block an $890 million contract with one of de Blasio's donors to take over school bus operations. The presumptive Democratic mayoral nominee, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, took a trip to D.C. this week after being invited by President Biden to discuss ways cities can combat rising gun violence and other crime. Adams praised Biden for bringing up the issue and said that Democrats need to focus more on handguns, not just assault rifles. De Blasio said he wasn't offended that he wasn't invited when reporters asked him about the meeting. Adams also said following the meeting that he would take a look at how cops are deployed, saying groups of police officers hanging out in subway stations isn't the best way to deploy the NYPD.
We must have a plan that's prevention and intervention. Prevention consists of some of the long-term things I'm talking about, dyslexia screening, doulas, making sure we have job employment, which he's doing in his plan, and then intervention.
Adams was a former police captain and served in the NYPD for more than 20 years. Adams went on to hold a joint press conference with Governor Cuomo on gun violence, with the two men vowing to work together as long as they're in their positions of power. While Cuomo lavished praise on Adams, Adams in turn wasn't gushing about Cuomo, but rather said that the two were targets of the progressive left, while the two men branded themselves true progressives.
And what we do in this moment decides the future of the city of New York.
My son won't grow up in a city that I grew up in. That is not going to happen. With a 13-year-old baby assassinated in the Bronx in broad daylight.
Adams also made the promise that if he's elected mayor, he plans to rename city streets and buildings that are already named after former slave owners like Lefferts and Stuyvesant. The Brooklyn Borough president received $1.3 million in public matching funds this week in his run against his Republican counterpart, Guardian Angel founder Curtis Sliwa. You may recall that New York City has a public campaign fund program, matching public donations up to a certain amount, 8-1. Former Councilwoman Elizabeth Crowley has conceded to incumbent Queensborough President Donovan Richards, who is looking to win his first full term in the position. Crowley conceded a week after Richards crudely took to Twitter to call Crowley a racist for reportedly saying Black Lives Matter was dead, although Crowley denied the charge. The city's summer school program started this week, seeking to bring students up to speed as the pandemic put a huge obstacle in the path of those advancing their scholastic careers. But Gotham has reported that 80 classrooms are already quarantining due to positive COVID cases among teachers or students.
It is not surprising there'll still be some positive cases. There always were some. There are always some classroom closures. But summer rising is occurring at about 800 sites, 800 school sites around the city. It's a huge program with around 200,000 kids in it. So if we have some classroom closures, that's not surprising to me.
Preliminary Education Department data show that 1 out of every 5 4-year-olds who applied for a spot in the city's Gifted and Talented program got a spot. The process changed to a nominating and lottery system from a testing system, with advocates saying tests for the G&T program didn't accurately reflect the diversity of the city. The State Board of Regents rejected a plan by 4 K-8 charter schools in the city to open a shared high school as a way to get around the city's cap on a maximum number of charter schools. Despite the CDC lifting indoor mask mandates for vaccinated people in schools, de Blasio said that city schools are still going to require masks in the fall. Recent recent gun violence in Times Square has led to an outcry by business leaders in the district, calling out de Blasio for perceived inaction. De Blasio in turn said that politics is motivating the business leaders to speak out against him.
If someone has an opinion, that's great. Someone wants to, stand up for their particular area or their constituency, and I understand those politics, that's great.
The mayor also commented on a case that involved police tasing a man on the subway on July 6th after the man helped someone dodge the fare, blaming both the perpetrator and police, saying the police failed to de-escalate the situation. An audit conducted by Comptroller Scott Stringer showed that the NYPD doesn't do a good job keeping track of seized assets from arrestees, like cash, cars, and jewelry, with invoice numbers in the department's tracking system showing gaps, which frighteningly could mean that cops may have kept seized possessions for themselves. Following the indictment of Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg on tax fraud charges, Trump's company quietly took Weisselberg off of every role he was involved in with the company. You would have probably heard Little Italy, Bensonhurst, and Bay Ridge from outer space when Italy beat England 3-2 for the World Cup this week, denying England the chance to win for the first time since 1966. England scored first, with Italy tying soon after, launching the game into decisive penalty kicks in overtime for Italy to come out on top in the end. Supporters of the proposed Queens Link, a new train line pitched by the MTA between Ozone Park and Regal Park, Queens, say the MTA are overestimating the cost of the project, with a report commissioned by the supporters saying the agency is tacking on an extra $4.6 billion to the $8.1 billion project, with those added dollars budgeted for consultants and contingency plans. De Blasio has tapped Finance Commissioner Sheriff Solomon to be the mayor's representative on the Traffic Mobility Review Board, which would make recommendations on the upcoming congestion pricing plan, which would place tolls on drivers going below 96th Street in Manhattan. The Riders Alliance, a public transportation advocacy group, released a report showing that 80% of delays during morning rush hours in the first half of the year were caused by signal problems, underscoring the issue's aging infrastructure continues to wreck on the city as it recovers from the pandemic. Opponents of making outdoor dining permanent showed up to a East Village Community Board meeting to combat de Blasio's plan to make outdoor dining a permanent fixture of city life. Residents opposing the plan say that noise and litter have increased, bringing a nuisance to the people who actually live in the neighborhoods where diners are showing up to eat outside. Over at the City Council, the New York Post took to targeting Bay Ridge Councilman Justin Brannan for amassing 60 driving and parking tickets since 2013, saying Brannan is the first to decry reckless driving and parking himself. Brannan said in response to the story that there is not an excuse for his violations and vowed to reduce his speeds. CNBC reported on the power of the real estate industry's hold on local political races, focusing on billionaire Stephen Ross's super PAC that donated and endorsed a big number of winning council races. Out of the 8 races Common Sense NYC targeted, 6 of those came out in Ross's favor, who made up half of the donations to the super PAC. Female winners of city primaries for council seats held a press conference this week to vow to support a female council speaker, heralding a new power dynamic in the city's unicameral legislature. Over at the Cuomo administration, the federal government's count of New York's COVID death toll has 11,000 more victims than the state's own count, as the Cuomo administration used a different modeling structure to count who really perished under the pandemic. Cuomo is embroiled in a scandal regarding how he counted the deaths of nursing home residents who died in hospitals from COVID. Money from the state's revamped rent relief fund still hasn't been dispersed, and likely won't for weeks because of technical glitches on the state website's application portal, delaying the $2.4 billion pool of money meant to go to landlords. A Siena College poll found that most New Yorkers believe the worst of the pandemic is over and are itching to meet with family and friends, probably at a restaurant, like they did in the before times. Governor Cuomo will be interviewed under oath by Attorney General Letitia James's office, which is investigating allegations of sexual assault by the governor from 10 women, including his current and former aides. Cuomo has denied all of the allegations and is also facing an impeachment investigation by the state assembly for other scandals, including his nursing home and COVID book controversies, although that process has been slow and costly to taxpayers.
He's going to have a very difficult day tomorrow because he is going to have to answer questions about his conduct with respect to a number of different women, the ones we know about and potentially ones we do not know about.
Costly to taxpayers is also Cuomo's legal representation against the investigations against him, to the tune of $800,000, along with donors who shelled out $285,000 to Cuomo's re-election campaign to pay Cuomo's lawyers. Cuomo said that he wasn't using campaign cash to pay his attorneys just last month. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin outraised Cuomo in fundraising, receiving more money than Cuomo did in the past 6 months, as the governor is besieged by scandals and investigations. Zeldin raised $4 million to Cuomo's $2.3 million, although Cuomo has $18 million in his campaign war chest to Zeldin's $3.2 million. The governor signed a series of bills into law this week that would make it easier to use absentee ballots for elections, getting rid of signature requirements and letting voters request absentee ballots over email. First, Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren loses her re-election to area councilman Malik Evans due to her handling of the Daniel Prude case and her husband's arrest on gun and drug charges. Now, Warren has been indicted by grand jury on criminal charges related to the guns found at her house, along with child endangerment charges, as the guns were kept in the same house as Warren's child. The mayors of Albany, Troy, and Schenectady, New York, Kathy Sheehan, Patrick Madden, and Gary McCarthy, respectively, joined up this week to take on diversity in the ranks of the police and fire departments in their cities. They met with a group of stakeholders, including the Group 100 Black of Albany, and plan on releasing an action plan to increase hiring a diverse group of applicants. Cuomo's administration is prohibiting a 20-member Blue Ribbon Commission examining how to reform the state's family courts from divulging its deliberations or else face a $10,000 fine from the state, with the state government only saying that government deliberations routinely happen under a mix of public and private gatherings and not giving a specific reason as to why the group has been barred from being transparent. Another bill Cuomo signed into law this week included texting in the definition of those annoying telemarketing calls and attempts to scam New Yorkers, and Cuomo also signed the rescission of a law that banned barbershops from operating on Sundays, which was on the books for 125 years. Didn't know that even existed. Over at the state legislature, following the Supreme Court's decision to make the NCAA allow college athletes to profit off of their likeness and image, some state lawmakers are looking to legalize the new arrangement here in New York at the state level. Quote, "We have to look at this industry as a whole and make sure we're protecting student athletes," said Assemblywoman Michelle Solages to the Times Union. Solages sponsored a bill that would let college athletes collectively bargain in New York. A bipartisan group of state lawmakers called on the state health department to release updated guidance on how to reopen schools in the fall as the pandemic continues to rage. The letter sent to the department said that the superintendents need time to prepare for their next semesters and comes out as the CDC said schools don't have to mandate mask wearing for staff and kids who have been vaccinated. For the first time in state history, a woman is set to lead the Western District of New York with the confirmation of Elizabeth Walford as Chief Judge. The Federal Western District of New York encompasses New York State's 17 western counties. A mixed virtual and in-person hearing by the Senate Ethics Committee hearing was awkwardly canceled at the last minute when not enough lawmakers even showed up for the meeting, which led Bronx State Senator Alessandra Biaggi to say that a potential violation of the state's open meetings law necessitated its reschedule. Out of the 4 lawmakers needed for a quorum in person, only 2 showed up. State Senator Zellner Myrie announced a series of hearings across the state from community members on their experience voting in their local elections, vowing to take the fight to reforming the various boards of elections, especially in light of the recent New York City Board of Elections snafus when it came to the New York City Democratic primary. Over at the state judiciary, the City Corrections Officers Union, the Correction Benevolent Officers Association, is suing New York City and the Department of Corrections, alleging that the department placed corrections employees under, quote, inhumane conditions, like triple shifts, denied access to water, masks, and gloves to protect against COVID and medical attention. Corrections Commissioner Vincent Schiraldi shortly afterwards announced a recovery plan from COVID, ending triple shifts as soon as possible, breaking up gang housing, increasing charges against violent prisoners, fixing jailhouse locks, and rolling out a young adult task force to tackle violence among the young inmate population. While the union says a staffing shortage is the issue as the inmate population grows, Commissioner Schiraldi said officers are calling out sick at alarming rates. Energy companies Con Ed and Orange and Rockland might pay New York $82 million to settle lawsuits about a lack of preparation in responding to Tropical Storm Isaias last year, which took out power to 1.5 million customers, leaving them in the dark in the midst of environmental destruction. Suffolk County, Long Island Police Detective Tulio Serrata has filed a $35 million federal lawsuit against the county for allegedly discriminating against his Dominican heritage when he was passed up on promotions that went to less qualified white men. Serrata said it was retaliated against when he testified against members of the police department that specifically discriminated against him regarding the promotions to the Suffolk County DA and legislature. A lawsuit spearheaded by the victim of the Manhattan DA Democratic primary, Alvin Bragg, has survived another hearing in court as appellate division judges greenlighted a judicial inquiry into the city's role in Eric Garner's death, who was killed during a chokehold put on him by former police officer Daniel Pantaleo. An opinion authored by Judge Anil Singh said the case brought forth by Garner's mother showed rare violations of duty and lack of substantial investigation by the city. Manhattan federal Judge Gregory Woods hit a pause on the city's attempts to move 8,000 homeless men from hotels back into congregate shelters, saying that disabled homeless men weren't given enough notice to receive accommodations, making the Department of Homeless Services come up with a plan to start over, a week after legal aid and homeless disability advocacy groups filed suit. Applications have opened to fill the Court of Appeals seat of retiring Judge Eugene Fahey, stepping down because he's hitting the capped age of 70 when judges in the state are not allowed to work on the bench anymore. For all of your regular everyday legal practitioners, a ruling out of the First Department Appellate Division said that an email that memorializes settlements does not need to be separately signed for it to be legit and binding. Their signature box in the email works just fine. Over at the Biden administration, continuing in the fight against the spread of the Delta variant and combating COVID, the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy warned that misinformation about the virus is a serious threat to public health and asked Americans to verify the information they're posting on social media about, even divulging that the pandemic has taken 10 of his own relatives.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, health misinformation has led people to resist wearing masks in high-risk settings. It's led them to turn down proven treatments and to choose not to get vaccinated. This has led to avoidable illnesses and death. Simply put, health information has cost us lives.
Even Biden took to airing his frustrations with misinformation, telling reporters that spreading false news about COVID is killing people.
What's your message to platforms like Facebook?
They're killing people.
Facebook pushed back on charges that it's responsible for the spreading of misinformation about COVID, laying the blame instead on Biden for not getting his goal of 70% of the U.S. population vaccinated with at least one dose by July 4th. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that reopening the border with America for vaccinated Americans might come in August, after a long-time request by officials to reopen the border. The FDA and Pfizer are in a current disagreement about the need for a booster shot, with the federal government saying it's too soon to push booster shots for those who are fully vaccinated, while Pfizer wants to get approval to offer the shot, with the company pointing at data showing increased immunity from COVID. The FDA slapped another warning label on Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, saying that a rare treatable neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which causes muscle weakness, tingling, and even paralysis. There have been 100 preliminary reports of GBS after around 12.5 million doses were administered, and of these 100 cases, 95 required hospitalization, and one person died. As for vaccines for kids under 12 years old, the FDA said those should be available by the middle of winter. Surge teams meant to help states with rising Delta COVID infections have been sent out to some states experiencing dramatic surges in infections like Nevada, but are slow to respond as the Delta variant spreads faster than federal officials can handle. Too many other states in the South and West are experiencing rapid increases in their deaths, hospitalizations, and 7-day positive test averages. In the month of June, COVID has killed more Americans than guns, cars, and flu combined. After the FDA limited the approval of a controversial drug to combat Alzheimer's, two of the nation's largest hospital systems said they were not going to use the experimental treatment Aduhelm on their patients. The Cleveland Clinic and Mount Sinai in New York made the decision this week. Biden visited his old stomping grounds in the Senate to join the Senate Democratic lunch to discuss strategy on how to pass his infrastructure proposals. Biden's Housing and Urban Development Department weakened some safety rules for public housing that would have mandated the presence of fire extinguishers, electrical outlets, and other protections against hazards, saying that landlords would be too burdened with those requirements, not making housing advocates happy. The IRS distributed millions in child tax credits to Americans, which is a measure passed in the COVID relief law earlier this year. Those with kids under 5 would get $300, and kids over 6 to 17 would get $250 per child. The program is temporary, with Democrats trying to either extend or make the payments permanent in their infrastructure proposals. Unemployment claims dropped to another pandemic low, as 360,000 claims were filed last week. With inflation still increasing, consumer prices just now raised 0.9% in June, a 5.4% increase from last June. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said that inflation is likely going to linger in the high digits before fading away later in the year as the economy stabilizes. The New York Times reported this week that the EPA approved toxic chemicals known as PFAS, almost a decade ago, despite the agency being steadfastly against the use of the substance. The chemicals were allowed to be used in 2011 in oil drilling, and now the approval of the substance's use wasn't known until now. Whistleblower complaints had recently alleged that the EPA office in charge of monitoring use of PFAS chemicals had been doctoring reports to make the substance look less dangerous. The Consumer Product Safety Commission sued Amazon this week, alleging that Amazon is ignoring regulators' orders to recall hazardous consumer products that are being sold by third-party sellers on their website. Amazon rejects the claim, saying it already took the actions the CPSC called for. Biden has denied Trump more water coming out of his shower head. The administration has reversed a Trump-era rule that asked the Energy Department to change standards related to how much shower heads output water pressure, going back to a standard implemented since 2013 and that companies have been complying with anyway all this time. The Biden administration announced protections for Alaska's Tongass National Forest this week, which includes no more logging and proposing to also prohibit road development over 9 million acres in the forest, reversing a Trump regulation that would have development and deforestation in the area. Customs and Border Protection data show that the government encountered another record number of migrants at the border, numbering at almost 189,000. The Department of Justice Inspector General's office released a report criticizing the way FBI agents handled Larry Nassar's case about the Olympic doctor who sexually assaulted numerous minors. Nassar is currently serving pretty much a life sentence behind bars, but the FBI reportedly only conducted interviews with just one of his accusers out of the 3 that came out against him publicly, with the report saying the FBI did not handle the case with the sense of urgency it deserved. According to a book soon to be released by journalists Carol Leonnig and Philip Rucker, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, was reportedly afraid Trump was going to ask his supporters to carry out a coup and pull off a Reichstag moment, referring to when Hitler and his Nazis burned down the German parliament. Milley said he was on guard for such a moment. The Joint Chiefs are the heads of the military branches. The twice impeached former president won a straw poll conducted at the Conservative Political Action Conference, with 70% of respondents wanting him to run in 2024, followed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who would lead with 68% of respondents if Trump wasn't in the picture. Trump spoke at CPAC, saying his 2 impeachments against him made him only worse, repeating lies that the 2020 election was rigged against him. Other books coming out about the former president have outlined other concerning things about his time in office, including saying he wanted those that revealed his bunker story last June to be executed for treason. It was reported at the time during George Floyd protests in D.C. in June that Trump went down to a bunker for protection. And in another book by Michael Wolff, Trump is quoted as saying he's very disappointed in Brett Kavanaugh, one of the justices he's nominated to the Supreme Court, saying Kavanaugh hasn't had the courage to be a great judge, and that Trump feels betrayed by all three justices he got on the court. Trump also reportedly regretted that he didn't order flags to go half-staff in the death of one of his supporters during the insurrection, Ashley Babbitt, who was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer for attempting to breach the House chamber. Biden himself weighed in on recent attempts by Republican legislatures to pass restrictive voting laws, saying in a speech at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia that those laws are an assault on democracy.
No other election has ever been held under such scrutiny and such high standards. The big lie is just that, a big lie. In America, if you lose, you accept the results. You follow the Constitution. You try again. You don't call facts fake and then try to bring down the American experiment just because you're unhappy. That's not statesmanship.
Trump lied about winning the election in 2020, complete with launching his supporters against the Capitol on January 6th and saying the election was rigged, leading to Republican legislatures in 14 states to pass laws that would restrict vote by mail and affidavit balloting, among others. Biden nominated former Republican Senator Jeff Flake to become the next ambassador to Turkey. Flake was known for becoming one of the first Republican detractors from Trump and retired from his seat. Biden also nominated career state official Ken Logsdon as ambassador to Moldova. Former New Mexico Senator Tom Udall was nominated as U.S. ambassador to New Zealand. Former ambassador to France Jane Hartley was tapped to become the next ambassador to the UK. Tracy Stone Manning, Biden's pick to lead the Bureau of Land Management from within the Interior Department, is facing new charges of anti-government behavior in the 80s during what's called a tree spiking incident during her time as an environmental activist, which involves hammering a spike into a tree so that it messes with the logger's operation on it afterwards. Stone Manning has been distancing herself from the incident since it was brought up. Former West Virginia Health Commissioner Dr. Rahul Gupta has been chosen to be the next head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. EPA scientist Alison Crimmins has been picked to guide the government's next report on climate change, called the National Climate Assessment, due by the end of 2023. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen withdrew her pick of economist Heidi Kriebel-Redeker for Undersecretary of International Affairs, as Kriebel-Redeker wasn't told why. More information is coming out about the recent plot to assassinate Haiti's President Jovenel Moise last week. A Haitian doctor living in Florida, Christian Emmanuel Sanon, apparently hired a private security firm to assassinate Moise so that he can somehow become the next president, although it's not clear how that would have happened through Moise's assassination alone. Questions also remain about where Moise's security detail were on the night attackers shot Moise in his home, and members of Haitian police were detained as part of a broader investigation into whether anyone knew about the plot from the inside. Biden said that sending U.S. troops is not on the agenda at this time, but said that he would send troops to defend U.S. embassy facilities and workers.
With regard to whether the circumstance in which we would send military troops to Haiti, we're only sending American Marines to our embassy to make sure that they are secure and nothing is out of whack at all. But the idea of sending American forces into Haiti is not on the agenda at this moment.
The Washington Post reported that some of the Colombians that took part in the assassination plot were in fact trained by the U.S. military, as is common with some U.S. allies. Protests also broke out on the communist country of Cuba at a scale that hasn't been seen in a long time, with members of a Cuban small town chanting freedom and images of the demonstration spreading to other parts of the island. A combination of Trump's reversal of Obama's rapprochement policy with Cuba, cutting off crucial tourist dollars in the pandemic, have made food, water, medicine, electricity, and money hard to come by. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel met the protests with repression, arrests, and calls for communists to counter-protest in the streets, while President Biden refused to lift the trade embargo on the country and called Cuba a failed state after Diaz-Canel cut off internet access to Cuban residents. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, with a state home to many Cuban dissidents, along with other elected officials, wrote a letter to Biden to restart an experimental program that would bring wireless internet access to Cubans through high-altitude air balloons.
The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights, and we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence, their attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
The Biden administration is also revoking travel visas for 100 politicians, judges, and lawyers connected to repressive government actions against Nicaraguan protesters, including detaining opposition lawmakers and suppressing political dissent. General Austin Miller, the military official who oversaw Afghanistan military operations, formally stepped down this week, symbolically ending the U.S.'s presence in the country. Biden said last week that the U.S. is going to complete its withdrawal ahead of schedule by August 31st and not 9/11. Former President George W. Bush, who started the war in Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks, said that he believes the withdrawal is actually a mistake, saying women and girls are going to suffer and that translators that helped the military were in jeopardy of being slaughtered by the Taliban. Those same translators and other aides to the U.S. military are awaiting flights out of the country by the end of the month, according to the administration, in what's called Operation Allies Refuge, led by State Department staffer Tracy Jacobson. The Biden administration didn't pass up a chance to make clear to China that it's continuing a Trump-era determination to deny all of China's claims to the South China Sea, which are also claimed by other Asian countries. Secretary of State Blinken said in a statement this week that if the Philippines were attacked by China, for example, the U.S. is bound by treaty to defend it. The White House is warning businesses here in the U.S. about the risks associated with doing business in Hong Kong now, as China has taken over the once thought of bastion of freedom in the communist country. Chinese government officials can spy on anyone without warrants and have to give up their proprietary data if the government asks for it. German Chancellor Angela Merkel visited the White House this week, first sitting down with Vice President Kamala Harris at her home, and then talking to President Biden. Biden and Merkel said they didn't expect to agree on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline running through Germany with oil supplied by Russia, but agreed about Russia not being allowed to use energy as a weapon. Merkel's visit comes in the backdrop of massive flooding that has killed more than 180 people in Germany and Belgium, with hundreds more missing. As multiple rounds of talks failed to come to an agreement to get the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table to reinstate the 2015 nuclear deal Trump scrapped that would have given Iran sanctions relief in exchange for reducing its nuclear enrichment program, news came out that 4 Iranian intelligence operatives attempted to kidnap a Brooklyn writer who's a usual critic of Iran, Masih Alinejad, but were instead arrested by the FBI. Biden's administration still said that resuming the nuclear deal is a national security priority, but according to briefings on Capitol Hill, it's a slow slog.
We categorically condemn Iran's dangerous and despicable reported plot to kidnap a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. We will forcefully defend U.S. citizens and U.S. interests. That includes law enforcement actions like the one announced yesterday, as well as the actions the president has taken to defend U.S. forces in the region from Iranian-backed militant groups. It also includes our diplomatic effort to constrain Iran's nuclear program, one of our most important and urgent actions.
A week after Biden called out Vladimir Putin and the Russian government to shut down their criminal hacking enterprises working out of their country, the hacking group REvil, which was responsible for hacking into global meat supplier JBS and 1,500 small businesses, disappeared from the internet. NBC News reported that hacking groups routinely shut down like this and come back under a different name later, however. First Lady Joe Biden is going to attend the Tokyo Olympics opening ceremony, leading a U.S. delegation there scheduled for July 23rd. 3 people had already tested positive in the village housing athletes and staff. Over in Congress and in the House, Democratic Rep. Joyce Beatty from Ohio, who also chairs the Congressional Black Caucus, was arrested this week protesting alongside a group fighting for the passage of the For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would reverse a number of voter suppression bills in Republican states. Democratic Rep. Brett Schneider of Illinois was sued this week by Patrice Campbell, a black former staffer, for allegedly fostering a hostile work environment when Campbell's supervisor Karen Davidman made a reference to lynching around Campbell, and then Campbell was retaliated against when she brought up the episode. Schneider's office denies and refutes the charges. Over at the Senate Democrats came out with a $3.5 trillion compromise infrastructure proposal that sought to bridge the gap between moderate and progressive Democratic proposals that includes measures combating climate change, expanding healthcare coverage, and family welfare programs. It's not clear whether Democrats even have the numbers within themselves to pass the proposal, as the current plan is to use the budget reconciliation process to get around the filibuster, which would only require a simple majority vote instead of 60 votes in the 100-person chamber. Democrats agreed on a tax on imports from countries that aren't aggressively going after climate change as a way to help pay for the plan.
On the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we're moving forward. We had a report today. We had a report from Kirsten Sinema, and she is optimistic that we can get to the goal that I proposed, that we have legislation ready by Friday.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer also rankled Republicans by going on the floor of the Senate and surprisingly saying that he was teeing up a procedural motion to get the bipartisan hard infrastructure plan moving. Biden and Senate Democrats have an ambitious plan to pass an infrastructure plan by August. Schumer also introduced a bill in the Senate aimed at finally decriminalizing marijuana on the federal level, releasing a proposal he worked on together with Senator Cory Booker and Ron Wyden, which would remove penalties, expunge nonviolent criminal records, and leave it up to states whether to legalize pot or not. Schumer also called for the Justice Department to investigate the National Rifle Association's attempt at using bankruptcy as an excuse to escape a fraud case in New York. West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin is still a key player when it comes to changing the filibuster to have a voting rights exception or being able to pass Biden's infrastructure packages, and it seems Republicans have him squarely in their pocket no matter his Democratic bona fides. Manchin this week headed to Texas for a Republican fundraiser, and a report by CNBC's Brian Schwartz details how Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, started a super PAC that contributes to Manchin's campaign for the first time. Manchin dashed the hopes of Democrats seeking to actually get something done with voting rights by saying he isn't going to support a filibuster voting rights exception, telling Texas Democrats it escaped having to vote for a repressive voting bill in there that it was off the table. A report released by Senator Roger Wicker, for the ranking member on the Senate Commerce Committee, details how a rogue department, the Investigations and Threat Management Service within the Commerce Department, was illegally spying on its own Chinese and Middle Eastern employees under the guise of revealing foreign spies, but wouldn't even close investigations into employees after no wrongdoing was uncovered. Biden officials suspended those investigations and are reviewing the department internally. The force responsible for the protection of the Capitol, and which came under fire for failing to protect it during the January 6th insurrection incited by former President Trump, is running out of money to operate itself, and Congress is slow-walking another authorization. Appropriations Committee Chair Democrat Patrick Leahy released a $3.7 billion plan to fund the Capitol Police, which is almost double the $1.9 billion House proposal and much bigger than the nearly $633 million Republican offer, which would get rid of security projects around the Capitol building. In the meantime, the Department of Justice said it has reviewed numerous reports of wrongdoing and misconduct on the part of the Capitol Police itself during the insurrection, getting ready to share its findings with defense attorneys. Over at the federal judiciary, federal Texas Judge Andrew Hanen ruled this week that the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which let so-called dreamers that were brought into the country as minors attain work authorizations under certain conditions, is illegal. Obama created the program after Congress failed to create a pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants. Trump tried to invalidate the program despite vowing to help dreamers, but was blocked in the courts. Judge Hanen said Congress never gave Obama authorization to create DACA and said that there wasn't even a public comment period for the new program. The ruling prevents Biden from accepting any new DACA applications and stayed his ruling so as to not affect current DACA recipients. The Biden administration vowed to appeal the decision. In what is surely going to disappoint some liberals, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer told CNN's Joan Biskupic that he still hasn't figured out his retirement plans and he's happy where he's at on the court. Some Democrats are itching to get Breyer to retire so that Biden can nominate and get a younger liberal justice confirmed before Democrats could potentially lose the Senate, as a 50-50 split already puts any nomination in jeopardy. Minority Leader McConnell has already said that he wouldn't bring a Democratic Supreme Court nominee up for a vote at any time during his leadership. Facebook asked the court overseeing an antitrust case filed by the federal government to recuse newly installed Federal Trade Commission Chair Lina Khan, saying Khan has made consistent public statements accusing Facebook of bad conduct. In Michigan, the attorneys that press legal claims of false election fraud in the courts are being grilled for making specious judicial filings, which is against attorney ethical rules. District Court Judge Linda Parker sniped at Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell, who alleged improprieties in Michigan's own election during the 2020 presidential race. A case about a local Texas justice of the peace allowing volunteer chaplains to open his proceedings with prayer has captured the attention of the Fifth Circuit, with the appellate court allowing the local justice to continue his prayers as he appeals a recent decision striking down his actions as a violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals panel voted 2-1 that the federal government cannot prohibit gun dealers from selling handguns to Americans under 21 years old if they didn't violate any laws, marking the first time that the right to bear arms has been extended to young people. And finally, in national news, Los Angeles County in California announced the reimposition of an indoor mask mandate in order to fight a surge of COVID cases there, largely due to unvaccinated people getting infected in droves. The mandate also applies to those who have been fully vaccinated. COVID cases have risen in 45 states thanks to the dominant Delta variant, causing a mini epidemic amongst unvaccinated Americans. Johns Hopkins University data shows that in 34 states, cases are up 50% higher than last week. The 7-day average of new COVID cases is up to 1,400 per day, a 150% increase from last month. Certain states are simply not helping themselves, like Tennessee, which has stopped vaccine outreach for minors after conservative politicians decried the policy and fired their top vaccination official, Dr. Michelle Fiskus. As the pandemic turned attention away from everything else so that Americans don't die, a record number of Americans have died otherwise from overdoses last year. 93,000 people perished from opioid abuse, according to CDC figures, a nearly 30% increase from 2019. Meth, cocaine, and prescription pain pills have also played a bigger role in overdoses last year compared to earlier years. After the Texas legislature was summoned by Governor Greg Abbott to pass a slew of conservative wish list bills, Republicans quickly passed a series of voting bills through both chambers, claiming that by taking out the most controversial aspects of the bills regarding banning Sunday voting and giving judges an easier time to overturn elections, the protests against the bills are much ado about nothing. Texas Democrats won't hear it, though, repeating the same tactic that killed the bills in the first place by not showing up to work. A picture showed Texas Democrats on an airplane heading to D.C. The voting bills would still ban drive-through voting, give poll watchers more access to potentially interfere in vote counts, and ban proactive mail-in ballot applications, among others. Underscoring the falsity of widespread voting fraud claims by Republicans, 182 cases out of the 3 million ballots cast in Arizona were found to be potentially fraudulent, with only 4 out of the 182 leading to any kind of charges, and no convictions as of yet. British billionaire and Virgin Galactic CEO Richard Branson and his team became the first group of people to take a commercial flight to space, launching off a platform and going 50 miles above Earth when zero gravity kicks in. The billionaire hopes to kickstart a space tourism industry with his flight. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is set to make his run to space next week, but this time launching 62 miles above Earth to what's called the Kármán line, a different altitude scientists point to as the official start of weightlessness and gravity. Bezos had held an auction to raffle off who can come with him and his crew to outer space, but the original winner, who bid $28 million for the seat, bowed out due to scheduling conflicts, and now 18-year-old Oliver Damon is set to join Bezos, which would make him the youngest person launching into orbit, even if it is at the edge of Earth's boundaries. Florida Judge Michael Hansman approved the request to sell the land at the destroyed Sunnyside condo building now rests in Florida, along with the souls of the almost 100 former residents that perished when the condo building collapsed weeks ago. The sale of the land would ostensibly go towards the victims and families of those who died in the collapsed condo, with some families rejecting the approval to sell as an insult to the memories of their loved ones. Pop star Britney Spears is allowed to choose her own lawyer to represent her in her bid to end a conservatorship that controls her life. LA Judge Brenda Penny ruled, finally giving Spears some control in the legal proceedings that gave her father James and other co-conservatives domain over Spears' health and professional life. Spears was placed in a conservatorship which is akin to a legal guardianship arrangement after her public meltdown in 2007, and for 13 years she hasn't been able to make an independent decision. High-profile attorney Matthew Rosengart, who has experience dealing with other celebrity cases, has been taken on as Spears' new counsel after the court-appointed lawyer Sam Ingham allegedly never let Spears know she can even challenge the conservatorship. Record heat waves and their consequent forest fires are raging in the American West, with the Beckworth Complex fire in California burning more than 80,000 acres and creeping into Nevada. A total of 768,000 acres are currently burning under wildfires in the western U.S., stretching firefighters' resources extremely thin and injuring them in the process. In California's recall election, although current Governor Gavin Newsom may not have to worry about losing the recall so much, he can't run as a Democrat, as his team missed the deadline to designate himself as one on the ballot, ruled local judge James Vergelis, which blamed the violation on Newsom's filing attorney. 90s hip-hop and rap star Biz Markie, known for his single Just a Friend, has died this week at the age of 57, according to his manager, with the cause of death not made public yet, although Markie had type 2 diabetes since he was 40. Jared Ramos, who shot and killed 5 reporters and newsroom workers at the Capitol Gazette in Maryland in 2019, has been found by a jury to be criminally responsible for the murders after Ramos's lawyers tried using an insanity defense, claiming Ramos couldn't tell right from wrong as he carried out the shootings. Ramos is now expected to be in jail for the rest of his life. A shooting that happened just outside Nationals Park in D.C. temporarily suspended a Nationals-Padres game and evacuated baseball goers on Saturday. 3 people were injured. And that's it for this week's show of the 25th Hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month to support the show at patreon.com/the25thhournews. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.